You say you believe in God.
I say I act as if he exists,
Okay,
which is a much more precise claim.
So you act as though God exists.
Yep.
And in addition, I've heard you say that I act as though God exists, that I can't really be an atheist.
So far it seems that.
Right, yeah.
We'll see.
The night is young. So in that sense, I'm not really an atheist. I've heard you say this. So that
some of you is.
Well, if I were really an atheist, I would be far more poorly behaved than in fact I am. Right? I would be like Raskolnikov committing murders and assuming there was nothing wrong with it.
It would be more likely, yes.
So in what sense do you mean? What is the God that you act as though he, she, it exists? And what is the God-shaped thing I must have in my life to prevent me from being a, quote, real atheist?
Well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I mean by God. Part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition. And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames, to your point. God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that means in some sense is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men. So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise. And those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father.
Well, it was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated. I'm not hearing a God, a personal God who can possibly hear anyone's prayers, much less answer them, right? And I'm wondering what percentage of religious people who would say, oh yeah, I believe in God and it's the most important thing in my life, what percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
I don't know, Sam. It's a good question, because when I go talk to people, when I talk to people online and use exactly this terminology, millions of people listen.
To call that thing God is fine. That's a God I have no problem with, right? But that's not how most people most of the time are using the word. And there's something misleading about that. And that worries me.
Yeah, well, if the claim that you're making is that we're all deeply confused about the nature of divinity and ultimate reality, it's like, yeah.
I mean, this is the problem. This is what worries me about this. So you could do the same thing with the idea of ghosts, right? So people traditionally have believed in ghosts. It's an archetype, you might say, the ghost. Survival of death is certainly an archetype. And we know what most people most of the time mean when they say they believe in ghosts. And I say, I don't believe in ghosts. and you say, no, you do believe in ghosts. Ghosts are your relationship to the unseen. That's a ghost. So you have a new definition of ghost that you're putting in the place provided, which I have to say, well, of course I have a relationship to the unseen, so yeah, I guess I do believe in ghosts. You win that argument. But that simply isn't what most people mean by a ghost. This is what I hear you doing with God. You have defined the God that most people believe in. By shifting the definition, you have robbed the noun, the traditional noun, of its traditional meaning. And you're imparting to people a sense...
Wait a second.
I'm not so sure.
What do you mean by
this.
traditional meaning? Look, it's one of the elemental claims in the Old Testament is that you're not even supposed to utter the name of God, because by defining it too tightly, you lose its essence. And so let's not be talking about what the classical definition of God is here, okay? I can tell you how a prayer might be answered. We could say, well, perhaps you've decided that, you've decided that you've seriously done something wrong, okay? And that you want to get away from hell. You want to make things better. Okay, so here's an exercise you can try. So here, what you do is you sit on the edge of your bed and you say, okay, what I did was wrong. And you have to really believe this, right? So you've thought about it. It's killing you. It's killing you. So now you're penitent and you're confessing, let's say. And you're confessing to yourself as much as to anyone. And you say, I really want to know what I did wrong. And I really want to know what I could do to put it right. And I'm willing to accept any answer that will manifest itself to me. Try that. See what happens.
Well,
that's a prayer that will be answered, and it won't be answered in the way that you want it to be answered. I can bloody well tell you that.
That is a process that I'm familiar with. It doesn't require any supernatural explanation, and it certainly doesn't require that we imagine that any of our books were dictated by the creator of the universe.
I didn't say that it required any supernatural
but that's fully understandable in terms of human psychology. And
it's not understandable because we don't know where the answer comes from.
Well, we don't know where anything comes from.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, but that doesn't open the door. I mean, one thing we can know with absolute certainty is that whoever wrote the Bible didn't know either. And there's many other things he or she didn't know, like everything else we know scientifically, right?
It's not so obvious what people know and what they don't know.
No one even knew the brain was involved in any of this. The problem is that you can, so again, this has been focused through the lens of your attachment to Christianity largely, but Hinduism is a completely different set of stories, right? And many of them, the logic, the emotional logic, the psychological import, many of them have the opposite valence from any Christian story you would tell. I'm just saying that there's over 1 billion people who have a religious system of stories from which they derive all kinds of meaning, to which they're mightily attached, to where we could play the same game of archetypal interpretation and valuing, and yet the cash value with respect to good and evil is irreconcilable with what you get from Christianity.
Look,
if Hinduism and Christianity are irreconcilable, right, then there must be a deeper level of reality that explains why they both work, that can't be reducible to Christianity being true or Hinduism being true.
It's one thing to have your belief system shattered by the observation that there are other belief systems that are incommensurate, that seem to have equal utility. But it's even worse is that once you make the observation that there are other belief systems that have equal utility, then it can shatter your belief in belief systems themselves. And then you're in the postmodern nihilist landscape, and that's a big problem.
Or you could just be in a more fundamental landscape that subsumes both of those belief systems.
That's fine. Let's hope that can happen.
Yeah.
There's enough commonality across the class of stories, the set of all possible stories, so that we can identify what constitutes a story. And I would say that there's enough commonality across the set of all possible good stories that we can say, well, here's a canonical good story, which is, by the way, what you do at the beginning of the moral landscape.
If you're in a parish of one,
Yeah.
or in a parish of 1,000, or a parish of 100,000, but not in the parish that has anything in common with the Bible thumpers in my country who think that Jesus is very likely coming back in their lifetime because he never died, and he's going to judge the living and the dead, and there will be a resurrection and hellfire and all the rest. If that's not the game you're playing at all, own it. Someone once asked you whether you thought Jesus was literally resurrected, and you said it would take me 40 hours to answer that question. Okay, that's the kind of thing I'm responding to here. You don't need to do that if you have a clear-cut answer to that question.
I don't have a clear-cut answer to that question.
And if you don't, that connects with many other things that we still have to talk about.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Because that...
It isn't obvious in the biblical account that Christ was literally resurrected. So it's not simple. This is not simple.
No, but if the question is, do you think he... Well, let's put it probabilistically. I mean, anything's possible. I'll tell you that it's possible that he was physically resurrected. I mean, it's even possible.
Wait a second, I didn't
with respect
say
to quantum
that he
mechanics.
Was.
The point is,
I said it would take me 40 hours to answer the question. I didn't say that he was.
Well, go ahead. How's this for an answer? Almost certainly not.
People seem to think that I'm trying to evade the question. It's like, I'm not evading the question. I'm trying to figure it out. People have been arguing about this for 2,000 years. It's like it's not simple.
But that's a symptom of the effect of religious dogmatism for 2,000 years.
No, it's not.